So
you
it's...
just see her little head in
Can
the
you see her
corner.
little head? Oh, perfect. I love it.
Hi.
That's really cute.
Hi, pup.
That's cute. So, I got this. This is some... Okay, this is the current listing of the most monthly listeners per artist on Spotify.
Nice paper.
It is nice paper. Uh-huh.
Okay. Wow, The Weeknd. I'm surprised.
I know, The Weeknd suddenly
He's
took over.
overtaken.
Uh-huh.
Also, Ed Sheeran is very high.
Yeah, as
he
always
put
had.
out something
He
recently?
has. This is the most followers.
Oh.
Ed has the most followers
Also on
of
Spotify?
all, over 91.6 million.
Oh my god.
He has literally the most. Ariana Grande's number 2
That
at
doesn't surprise me
75
that
million.
much. I'm
But,
kind of
you know,
surprised
he's
by Ed Sheeran.
15 million ahead of her. 16
to that.
million ahead. In other
That's
words,
crazy.
Ed Sheeran is as far ahead of Ariana Grande as the total number of people listening to
Oh.
Led Zeppelin every month.
Wow. Wow. See,
Pretty funny.
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's funny. Ed Sheeran surprises me as being like so high in terms of followers because when I think about what I would consider like Ed Sheeran's era of music was kind of that first couple albums he put out, which was
Yep.
more like 2014.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that he'd be so high in followers even now.
It's very
because-
interesting. To me, it's like there was this early period of Ed Sheeran, to me, was like the promise of Ed Sheeran.
Yeah.
Right? Like those early songs, and I'm thinking mostly of the A-Team. When that came out, that was like the breakout song,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, that is a really well done song.
Oh,
You know,
definitely.
like, it's well written. It like pulls at your heart. It's good musically. And then, like, somewhere along the line, I just kind of lost him, or he lost me, I guess
think
I
it's
should
interesting
say.
because he really did start to shift and went in kind of more of a pop direction because that entire first album, which I think is Plus, I think is like the technical name of it, it was so much more soulful and quiet, a lot of, I mean, obviously he's a guitar player, but a lot of acoustic guitar and very like down to earth, I guess is the way I would put it.
Easy.
And then kind of looking more, I mean, I haven't listened to him relatively recently. I think the last album that I really listened to and sort of critiqued was when I was a senior in high school, so 2017-ish, when he came out with Divided.
Right.
And Divided had this really interesting blend of songs that I was like, oh, this is more what I consider like traditional Ed Sheeran, where he is like, it's really quiet, it's really soulful, there's a lot going on. There's a song called Supermarket Flowers in particular that I think of as being like, it's really stripped down, it's very quiet, it's sort of this like, I don't know if his mother actually died, but it's kind of this homage to like losing a parent. And but then there's also songs like New Man is also on that album, which is one of the most, it has a cool vibe, but it's very much a pop song. Like it's very much this sort of like, it has certain elements that kind of remind me of artists like Ariana Grande and stuff like that, where it's almost, where it feels a little bit like, pandering is a strong word, but sort of trying to play to the more popular songs and everything and play that up to really stay relevant, I guess. Yeah. Even though he as an artist is clearly very relevant. Like, that's what's so interesting.
The most relevant.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, so let's interrupt. I'm going to say hello to everybody. This is Guitar Discoveries. This is my daughter, Avalon Cassard.
Nice to meet you.
She's never been on the show before.
No.
And last week we were having this interesting cross-generational conversation. You know, we've got going on 4 decades between us. So there's a different perspective. And for me, having her perspective kind of woke me up to a few things. So it was a very fun conversation, and we thought it would be fun to have cross-generational conversations that we could share with you.
Yeah.
So hope you like it. Hope it
ends up being interesting.
Yes, exactly. So, we were just talking about Ed Sheeran, who is the #1 most followed artist on Spotify. We have our dog Maisie, who's going to help us out here too.
She's a supporting character in
Definitely. She's an important supporting character in our house. Yes. So Ed Sheeran is the #1 most followed Spotify artist.
Yes.
91.6 million. So I'm curious, from your perspective, why do you think that is? What is it about Ed Sheeran that's grabbed so many people?
I think he really started as this very different kind of out-of-the-box artist because he was doing something that was so stripped down and unique in that era of really that kind of crazy EDM, like, summer vibe was so strong in, like, 2013, 2014. You know, I think about... I mean, you won't know any of these songs, but stuff like Cobra Starships was a band that was really popular. I think they did many kind of those like summer anthems was what I was really thinking of. And that was a period where it wasn't just like pop music the way it is now, where it has this kind of like more R&B, like trap vibe built in. It was way more dancey, way more electronic. That was really the height of electronic music. I mean... Now that's still a very popular style, but it's not invading the pop charts like it was.
So you think period. Ed Sheeran cut through then because he was different than the EDM? He was a contrast to the EDM.
Oh, complete contrast, like dead opposite of the EDM and that nature. It's similar to when you're thinking about really trying to stand out from a musical perspective. I think it is really being like, oh, everyone's doing this, I have to do something else. And so him coming out and like the A-Team was almost a relief from...
I remember how I felt about it when I heard it. It caught my ear. Like, I thought, okay, those lyrics for one thing were really powerful. And I thought, who is this guy?
Yeah.
You know, so it caught my attention as someone who, you know, likes real music.
Yes.
It caught my attention. So it's sort of like, wow, Ed Sheeran grabbed me way back when. And I think he's been in a slow, steady process of losing me ever since. Like, pretty much every tune. Like, what was the one that I just heard that's like his recent hit? Something about the freeway or something. What, you know what it is? I honestly
don't.
Okay.
That's why I'm surprised that he's as prominent in terms of followers. I mean, you know, he's not the number one monthly listeners, so I guess there's a lot of people who follow him.
Who is the number one monthly listener?
The Weeknd.
The answer is, the Weeknd.
The Weeknd, which doesn't surprise me. I honestly, by pop music standards, I really think The Weeknd is a good artist. His music is really creative. He's very... Again, kind of different, while still being very the same, if that makes any sense.
Meaning consistent?
Yes, but also he's still fitting within the, like, current music mold of, like, what is popular, but doing it in a more unique way. He's similar to Bruno Mars as an artist to me, where there's this sort of attribute of still standing out. I mean, Prince was kind of like that, while still being in the constraints of what's currently popular, and, like, being relevant for that reason.
Yeah.
I'm surprised Justin Bieber's as high as he is, but I know there's a lot of people who are very loyal fans of his.
They certainly must be. The fact that Justin, I think last month I checked this list, he was over 90 million listeners a month.
Yeah.
He was the number one by far. Like, nobody was even touching him. So he must have had a new tune out. Ed Sheeran is sitting here with 75 million monthly listeners and 91.6 million followers. You know, so people clearly want to follow him. They want to know what he's doing. Yeah, she's getting adjusted.
Yes, got to turn around.
So, I guess my what this makes me ask. So that, you know, looking at the top monthly listeners, The Weeknd, Justin Bieber, Ed Sheeran, Dua Lipa, Adele, new album. You know. Yeah. Coldplay, Doja Cat, Imagine Dragons, Ariana Grande, Bruno Mars. Okay, Taylor Swift doesn't make the top 10.
Shocking. She's number
11.
Doesn't.
Drake doesn't make the top 10. Elton John is in there at 13. We know. That's because he put out an album with the Duets album that doesn't really even sound like Elton John.
It doesn't sound like him at all. It's a creative idea, and it's something that I think is cool as an artist that's been in the music scene for such a long time to do something like that. But I think bringing newer artists to your style would be cooler than you going to theirs, and especially when you're having such a variety.
I would agree with that.
Well, because when you have such a variety of artists like coming together and doing this, the album then feels sort of inconsistent, and because you're matching all these different styles, whereas if they're coming out as individual singles, that's kind of cool, where it's like, oh, him going and doing this cool duet with an artist and creating this interesting generational togetherness, but also genre togetherness, versus creating one big album where all of them are together. Because when someone comes out with an album, you have the tendency to want to listen to the album. I mean, that's why Taylor Swift, her albums perform so well because they're very like coherent, yes, and very consistent, and so you can listen to it as a whole thing. I mean, that's the reason I think vinyl has circled back around and become really popular again, is because there's such a push for albums to be really consistent. So an artist like Elton John kind of being like, oh, I want to be relevant, I want to come into the modern era, but also creating something that feels more disjointed.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So yeah, it does feel more disjointed to me because it's very much influenced by each artist. I'd love to know what viewers think. I'd love to know if you think, like, do you like that Elton is doing that, bringing in a bunch of different people and letting their styles rule? Or do you think it'd be cooler for him to do what Avalon is suggesting, which is really the, hey, it's Elton, they come to his territory. It's interesting. And if they did that, would it be on the charts? Would it be as
would it
relevant?
be as popular? And I think that is really a question because, at least, I mean, we have a very musical environment here, but like, I know who Elton John is. I've listened to numerous Elton John songs, but most of the other people I know, regardless of if they're musical or not, know who Elton John is. So it's not like he's a completely irrelevant, like, random one-hit wonder or something. Obviously, he's had a very stable and strong career. But, so I think he's an artist that can do that a little more and bring someone to his genre and his style and, challenge a newer artist to go out of their comfort zone versus him going out of his comfort zone with, like, 8 different people,
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it surprised me to hear how much he was the chameleon. Mm-hmm. And it surprised me how much it caught on.
Yes.
Given that our reaction when we heard it, we listened to it in the car one day, and we were kind of flipping through songs, letting a little bit play, kind of like go through a verse and a chorus. So how do you feel about this? What's happening here? And we felt like Elton was almost missing. Yeah,
there was a couple songs that we definitely had more of an affinity for. The one he did with Miley Cyrus, I know we kind of agreed was the best one. Which I think, though,
but it was the most...
Her style meshes with his style well. Yes, exactly. So they have... And she's in this phase of really modeling Joan Jett in her style and really going with this cool kind of slightly classic rock, but... being modern about it, which is really interesting and a very unique vibe, but that meshes well with him and what he's always kind of done. And I mean, he has those outlier songs like doing the soundtrack for Lion King, Can You Feel the Love Tonight?
Oh, yeah.
But those still like fit into his overall style and vibe for a certain way. They're more out there, but...
They do, but, he always had a thing where he talked about writing a hymn.
Yes.
If you want to have a hit, you write a hymn. And Can You Feel the Love Tonight's a hymn, right? Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me is a hymn. It's like he wrote a lot of hymns, actually. If you look at his hits, almost every ballad could be in church. Just change her to God or whatever, and suddenly it all works.
Exactly. And I think Miley Cyrus has a voice and a style that lends itself well to that. Even his more, like, rock... or even more like traditional pop style, like her voice and her vibe work really well with that. They're really compatible, even though it's different. Like, they're still different. It's a really cohesive overall feeling.
Okay,
I guess.
So knowing what we know, that The Weeknd and Justin Bieber and Ed Sheeran and Dua Lipa and Adele are the top 5 right now. And then in saying that, Adele, she's got the lowest number of monthly listeners at about 60 million. Wow. And then we go and we look at classic rock artists, and we say the number 1 classic rock artist on Spotify has 36 million listeners a month, and that's Queen.
Yeah.
The Beatles, 25 million. They have less than half. The Beatles, as a band, their whole oeuvre has less than Adele, right? I mean, like half, less than half of what Adele currently has in the way of
monthly listeners. I think is interesting and surprising to me because of their overall cultural influence.
Yeah.
The Beatles are a band that is recognizable whether or not you actually listen to their music. It's recognizable.
Yep.
They're, at least most people can name like 2 of their songs. Even if they've never heard one before, I'm sure, they'd still recognize it. They know the name.
I think that's true.
Yeah, there's a certain iconic nature to the Beatles. And
a cultural relevance that has lasted somehow 50 years.
And I think it's interesting that you as a band
60 years.
can have can like have that influence, but then not even cross 30,000 or 30,000.
Yeah,
30 million.
And these are snapshots. You know, they're like a snapshot of the relevance right now to Spotify listeners.
Yes.
You know, so we have to factor that in. It's like, how many people my age use Spotify versus people your age?
Well, and I
Spotify?
think there is an
we
element
don't know that.
of...
I wish we did.
Yeah, of social media, especially sites like TikTok, playing into the popularity of songs. I mean, obviously, we've had so many artists recently that have truly blown up only due to TikTok, you know, where it's like, oh, I had 100 followers and suddenly I have, 68 million people, like, I'm getting nominated for Grammys and stuff, which is insane and incredible that, like, something so small ultimately can have that level of influence for someone. But it is interesting because it really shifts what's popular, because it puts so much more pressure on relevancy and, like, quick consistency rather than
and almost
quality.
like that what's the word that I'm looking for? It's like not quotability, but like you can just
like
pull a little
snippability,
snippability, exactly. You can pull a little snippet
Yes.
out and suddenly you've got a hit on your hands.
A great sound, yeah.
So it favors repetition.
Yes.
It favors to some extent like something super catchy, that people can grab, and probably something that you can put another piece of footage to that it comments on that footage.
Yeah, and I think especially, it has to be sort of danceable, I guess is the way I would put it, where that's the major trend with TikTok, of course, is the dances. And so you need a sound that has a strong enough melody and beat that it's appealing for someone to make sort of a trend for.
Yeah.
And I think while I hear certain like classic rock songs that kind of come up here and there on TikTok overall, it's not the main style of music that's being, sort of passed around.
Right.
And which lends artists to lean way more pop overall, and it, like even
if
Adele,
your point is to get famous, you pretty much have to lean in that catchy snippability direction, right? At least if you're going to do it through a vehicle like TikTok.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why artists like Doja Cat and Dua Lipa are very popular, especially currently. Yeah. Not that, they've been popular for a number of years now, but to the level that they are at, it's supported through TikTok for sure. And through just their social media presence in general and how people my age and younger sort of consume media, too, because there's so much more pressure on repetition and it just being catchy to have those cool, interesting sound bites that are like lend themselves well versus creating a unified song that feels like a whole story and is one cohesive piece where you need to kind of listen to the whole thing.
I wonder about that. Like, if those artists are cognizant of what they're doing, some of them obviously do write complete songs that are probably pretty well constructed. In some cases, I've heard a few that have come through that sort of TikTok thing, that if you go deeper, you go back to the original song, that's not a bad song.
Yeah.
There's some musical invention there. The lyrics maybe are decent. I mean, most of the time they're not profound, at least most of what I've heard. So it doesn't seem to value or what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it doesn't reward depth.
No, I think that's true. And I think even an artist like Queen, where they have catchy, like, repetitive songs, there's still an element of depth going on there that I don't think is as appealing. And there's certain...
With Queen, you have that sort of the depth of virtuosity.
Yes.
Right? Both in their performances, in their songwriting. I mean, their songwriting, even a simple song, something that sounds like a ditty, is incredibly complicated. When you look at whether, anything. I'm trying to think of a good example of that from the Queen catalog. Like, Someone to Love, as an example, right? And you think, okay, Somebody to Love... It doesn't, on the surface of it, if you just hear it once, you'd go, oh, that's probably a pretty simple song, because it has those accessible, almost vaudeville kind of elements, right? But then as you go deeper, you go, oh my gosh, hold on a minute. These guys have built, Freddie Mercury wrote these mini operas, basically.
Yes,
That's
and
what he did.
Overall, it's an incredible, more ballad piece while still having so many other levels that make it way surpass a ballad.
Right.
Which
it keeps rewarding you every time you come back, which I think that may be one of my principal complaints. I mean, maybe we're getting to something that's relevant here. That one of my principal complaints with a lot of modern music is I don't feel it rewards repeated listenings. It's almost like it gets worse the more you listen to it.
Yeah,
that's my impression. Right?
No,
that
I
like
can see that.
It's engineered to hit you the first time you hear it, and it doesn't really care beyond that, or that's what it feels like.
I think
to
it's
me.
especially there's an emphasis on it's designed to kind of get stuck in your head, but not really to be adding like value to your life or you to like generate a feeling for you.
Yeah.
It's way more focused on just being something that's memorable.
Right.
But not necessarily for the right reasons, I guess is the way I would put it. Like Queen's an artist that creates really memorable songs.
Definitely.
And, you know, Bohemian Rhapsody is an epic, but each individual
and
little
how
part
wacky,
is so memorable.
Right.
But
that's like, I don't know how many songs. I've never counted how many sections there are, but there are a lot of sections in
there's
that
at
tune.
least 4, if not 5, 6, 7, you
right,
know?
exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
4
And
distinct
even
that stand
anything
out
that
to me.
repeats is a variation.
Yes.
It's not just the
It's
same
not
thing that
the
happened
original,
before.
yes.
So yeah, when you get that level of sophistication and development of a song.
Oh, definitely. Well, and especially with Bohemian Rhapsody, is they're creating a whole opera in the span of like 10 minutes, you know, which is incredible. Like that's such a unique thing to be doing, while each one as its kind of own mini song can stand alone and has full value. I mean, the entire beginning is this beautiful epic ballad, this totally heartbreaking moment, and then you have like the whole like choir piece right in the middle, and then you get to this ending that's just basically a rock song. Like it's a fascinating development that creates these interesting sound bites, but that are not, they're memorable for different reasons, and it's not appealing to kind of the current nature of needing something like quick and fast and just wanting something that's...
Yeah, you kind of wonder, okay, if Queen were trying to make it on TikTok, you know, We Will Rock You could probably do it, right?
That's like the one song, I think.
Bohemian Rhapsody, you know, maybe Scaramouche, you could grab a little teeny piece of it, but nobody would really know what it was even meaning. It would just be someone having to dance really weirdly in order to make it cut through. Yeah. It's different. It's very different.
It's a totally different dynamic, and I think on the one hand I'm like, wow, I'm surprised there's not more monthly listeners, but I'm also surprised that there's not less in a way. They're in that interesting gray area where I'm like, wow, that...
So you're saying 33 million is a pretty respectable number for a band that did its most relevant work like in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, and I mean, but it's surprising to me that there's not, because of the nature of, even if, people... you know, your age aren't as likely to be on Spotify and they aren't the primary listening basis. Yep. But it's still, you know, people your age have kids. There's tons of people my age who I'm sure listen to Queen and I'm sure have listened to Queen a lot of their life, but I think it plays into how many families music is not a focus and it's not, you know, they listen to the radio. Yeah. And so even the like older family members are probably listening to more of kind of the most current popular music.
That could be true.
You know, and they're not going out of their way, I guess, to like maintain like loyalty or like being more of a fan longer term, even if they're like, oh yeah, I like Queen, but they may not be like playing it around the house. Or
well,
like
something that's interesting about this question of, you know, I mean, why does an artist who's older not have the number of listeners? Okay, some of it's age, but literally some of it is the age of the music and the fact that those artists aren't putting out new stuff. You know, Freddie Mercury's gone, right? There's not going to be any... other than something that's stuck in an archive somewhere, that we're not going to get any new, real Queen music anymore. And so it's kind of like, okay.
I do wonder, like with a band like Queen, where you have, you know, obviously their most relevant years were decades ago now, but they had the movie Bohemian Rhapsody come out in the last 5 years. And
I'm sure they got a huge boost.
Exactly. But I do wonder, like, with bands like that, when you have those kind of points that it shoots up, like how long they're sustained. And if it encourages people to be a longer term listener, well, obviously a number of them drop off, I'm sure, as relevant by the fact that they only have 33 million people listening to them regularly. But it is interesting to think like, oh, well, does that encourage more listeners? Like, does their overall number
okay, here's one. Like,
rise long term?
When the Beatles Get Back documentary came out, I maybe naively thought, oh, it's going to be a home run for the Beatles, and suddenly the Beatles are going to go from, I think they were hovering like 23, 24 million listeners before that came out. Oh, wow, they got up to 25. You know, it's a blip, but it's barely anything more than that. So, you know, I'm watching this documentary thinking, oh my gosh, it's on Disney Plus. There's a whole new generation of fans going to see it. And I'm like, well, am I naive to think that that generation of fans is going to sit through 8 hours of documentary
Well, it is
content?
8 hours, yeah. I think that is kind of a lot. Well, some of
their creative process, noodling around on old songs. I mean, it's probably unrealistic.
Yeah. And I think with the Beatles, you have the unique element of, like, Paul McCartney is still putting out music.
Yep,
and so I do wonder, like, how many monthly listeners Paul McCartney has versus the Beatles, and if it's...
Just look it up.
You know...
Where's my phone?
Under that
right
paper, I think.
Oh, no.
Because I think that plays into it. If he, you know, if he has a close number to them, I'm like, oh, well, it seems like there's probably a lot of people listening to Paul McCartney.
Interesting question right there. Paul McCartney. Okay, 10.3 million listeners. I mean, that's higher than many country artists. Some of the biggest country artists have number lower than that. So, interesting.
Well, and country is one of the most, like, hated on music genres there is, surprisingly.
Okay, so you're bringing up an interesting point, because you've got Paul, you've got George, who, you know, we have a new release of All Things Must Pass. We have John, whose albums are always kind of resurfacing in one form or another. Let's take a look at John.
You basically have 4 independent.
I mean, you know, here's a guy who died in 1980, and how many listeners does he have? He's got 8.9 million. He's not putting out anything new. He's close to Paul, right? And then let's look at George, 6.6 million. Yeah. So, you know, when you combine the three of them and you go, okay, well, there's a 10, almost 11, an 8, or an 19, you're about 25. Yeah. So if you think about it as 25 million independent, 25 million as a group. Very interesting.
As a whole group, counting both their independent and them as one group, you have 50 million.
50 million listeners. Theoretically.
It could all be the same, yes, I'm sure. I'm sure lots of them are...
But that is interesting, because I really hadn't thought about them as solo artists.
Yeah, because I think that plays into it whenever you're dealing with a group. Like, while Freddie Mercury obviously stands out from Queen, they were always kind of a unit.
Oh, for sure.
You know, they weren't doing things independently like they were Queen.
That's right.
So that's kind of the only presence they have
Consolidated
on Spotify.
listeners.
Yes. Versus... You know,
other than Under Pressure with David Bowie or something, you know, like these one-offs.
Yeah, but overall, you know, that's their only, like, that's the only space they're taking up on Spotify. The Beatles, having 4 members that all put out things independently, is technically taking up sort of 5 areas in Spotify that each have their own potentially crossover listeners, but, you know, their own viewership.
Yes. Perfect. All right, so that leads me to another question, which is sort of I think it's the big question that relates to this topic of how many listeners does someone have or how many followers. And the question for me is, does quantity reflect quality? Does the quantity of followers and listeners reflect the quality of that artist? Now, I know I'm using a really broad term, but what do you think? Do you think quantity and quality actually relate?
I think...
You can look at the list if you want.
No, it's okay. I don't need to look at the list. I don't need to look at the list. But I think in certain cases, yes. With artists that are passionate about what they're doing and really care about being a musician regardless of if anyone's listening, I think,
love that.
You know,
like
quality...
the way you just put that. Regardless of whether anyone's listening.
I think in that kind of case, quality and quantity are... You know, they have a symbiotic relationship, because it's, you know, they're putting all of their heart into something. They're putting out a piece of very quality music for the right reasons and the right purpose.
Right.
And so any listening that's generated from that is great, you know, because you're supporting a piece of quality. Yeah. It's like...
Those are sort of like the art listens.
Yes.
The ones that are appreciating it as a piece of art.